I was reading chapter 4, I got a little confused because I thought, well, if you're progressive, if you're postmodern, then your thinking is more advanced or more developed or something. But then when we describe the um, the problems with it, the things that are problematic with it, seems like it's not so much more advanced at all. Like the attacks on everything else and the kind of prejudice that postmodernists have and so forth. So I would like you to talk a little bit about how the developmental theory of the human being versus politics, how do they go together and why do you think one is more advanced?
Sure. Well, that's an excellent question. First, let me say that when I was writing Developmental Politics in 2017 and 2018, the leading label for this, what I'm now calling the progressive postmodern worldview, was to refer to it as postmodernism for short. And so that's what I use throughout developmental politics. Since then, we've sort of evolved. I mean, the discourse in the larger society has evolved, and the term progressive has really come to the fore. So in the last 3 years, I've gradually migrated to using progressive as shorthand. So pardon me if there's a little confusion between postmodern and progressive. They mean the same thing as we're talking about it here. So in terms of developmental psychology, the main psychological emergent capacity which folks who make meaning using a postmodern center of gravity or progressive identity, the thing which comes online at the progressive stage of development is a sensitivity to the inner feelings of others, a connection to the interiorities or the subjectivity of other people. And so, the pain, both the pain in the present and inherited pain from the past, is something that motivates progressive people to make the world a better place in ways that modernists or traditionalists were not aware. I mean, certainly modernists had sensitivity, certainly traditionalists did. It's not like sensitivity by itself in general is owned by progressives, but progressives start to care about those who've been left behind. It's no longer a race to the top, like in modernity, which is intensely individualistic. And so in the polarity of competition and cooperation, competition is emphasized in modernity, and that leads to some of its pathologies. But even though there are pathological elements of over competitiveness without cooperation, competition in general, in the market, is what's created the computer and the Zoom software we're using to have this conversation. I mean, competition is what put us on the moon. I mean, competition has been a leitmotif of modernist development. So, progressives, those sometimes who, as I'll explain when I get into the polarities, there's a tendency to sort of, when you're in a polarity, to see the other polarity as simply bad. So in the polarity of cooperation and competition, within a lot of green discourse or progressive discourse, it's cooperation is good and competition is bad. And so there's this kind of, and that is a result or a perception that is tied directly to the sort of the larger historical project of progressivism as a set of values, which is to overcome the negative externality of modernity and the inherited aspects of our society from the traditional modern establishment, which continue to allow racism and inequality and war and all kinds of negatives that progressivism condemns for good reason. That's how it emerges in history. Is there's an awakening to the need to care about these problems in a way that these previous worldviews were not caring about them. So progressivism is more sensitive, more caring. That's why I use the nickname "caring values" in the book, and I can also say that it brings a connection to nature. There's the beginning of the process of rediscovering what was lost in earlier stages. So one of the things that progressivism does is it yearns for the dignities of tribalism that have been lost, right? The enchanted world, the connection to nature. So tribal aesthetics become extremely popular at the progressive level. I mean, we could point to Burning Man as a progressive, festival, which is, it's characterized by a progressive tribalist fusion aesthetic. And that's very much, this feeling of, okay, we have to reach back, and there's a romanticization of tribalism, that kind of conveniently forgets about all the really gnarly conditions that people existed in when they lived in tribes. But nevertheless, that process of reaching back and trying to begin the process of reintegrating what's been lost, that process continues at this post-progressive level, but we're not only able to recover the dignities of the tribal stage, we're also recognize how we need to recover the dignities of traditionalism and modernism and even valorize pre-traditional as much as we can.
But are you saying, though, that like individuals themselves may not have, and who consider themselves progressive, may not have developed their own, I don't know, is it integral way of thinking? Is it?
No, definitely not. And that's something I'm going to talk about. In other words, that progressivism is, in some ways, I need to affirm it as one of the most evolved, probably the most evolved form of culture that is yet to appear, a large-scale culture that's yet to appear along the timeline of human history. And the reason that I can claim that it's higher is that it's more inclusive, right? It includes those who've been left behind. It cares about the marginalized and the victimized. And although, like anything, sometimes it goes too far in that direction, in general, that's a very important project that our civilization needs to tackle before we're going to be building anything higher, right? We don't want to have a sterling civilization with, thousands of homeless people, struggling in the street, right? So we have to care about those who are not the winners. We have to care about the losers. And while every worldview has a version of that, progressivism brings it online more strongly than ever before. Now, folks who make meaning and who identify with and who've developed in developmental psychology terms into a progressive worldview, again, these are cultural structures as I'm defining them. So people can be center of gravity progressive, but still regress into other worldviews and still become mean or selfish, right? It's not like you can become a saint at the level of progressivism, but you have a cultural outlook and you have a set of folks who you feel like are your people who share these value agreements around environmental protection, social justice, economic equality, gender equality, all of the things which, we can trace back to earlier levels, but really form the central focus of the values of the progressive worldview. However, what progressivism can't really do, at least as a cultural agreement structure, that this next level can do and needs to do, and why it needs to emerge beyond progressivism, is that progressivism can't adequately include the best of what's come before. Right? In their mode of rejection, in their mode of antithesis, they view modernity and traditionalism only for their negative. So they can't see how it's interdependent and how they're very important dignities of those levels, which are the foundation of our larger cultural growth.